So a couple years ago, before I started doing videos, I redid the floor in this upstairs hallway. As part of that project, I also installed new baseboards to replace the old ones. At that time though, I didn't have all the right tools. I was cutting the baseboards with a miter saw and just estimating the angle by eye. This caused some of the corners to have unsightly gaps, and in other spots the baseboards didn't quite match up. I didn't really want to show you these, but I figure if I can prevent someone else from making the same mistakes, then that's a good thing. And it's also a good demonstration of how important it is to have the right tools. And that brings me to this video's sponsor, which is Starbond. Starbond sent me a kit of their assorted CA glues, and this turned out to be a huge help in fixing my baseboards. Their CA glues come in a variety of thicknesses and colors. I'll be using the medium here in this video. Check out the link in the video description below and use code JOHNSRENOVATIONS for 10% off your order. And thanks to Starbond for supporting my channel. Even though the angles on some of the miters weren't perfect, I was still able to reuse some of the baseboards like the ones in this section here because of the CA glue. After taking the baseboards off the wall and removing all the nails, I laid out some construction paper to avoid getting glue on the floor. I used the medium thickness glue on the end of one board and then sprayed the other board with the accelerator and joined them together. When using the accelerator, you only have to apply pressure for 10 to 20 seconds, and then you can see the two boards are joined together. I could slide these two pieces into place and then nail them in, but since I have a third section, I went ahead and glued it on as well. With all three pieces together, I slid them into place while my cat serenaded me. Or maybe he was heckling me.
Hey! Be quiet!
I went ahead and nailed the baseboards into place, filled all the nail holes with spackle, gave it a light coat of paint to cover up said nail holes, and then caulked the gap at the top using the painter's tape method to avoid making a mess. All in all, this was a nice improvement, but what I didn't show you was that when I nailed in the boards, one of the glued joints came free, and I had to fill it with spackle before painting. Let's go ahead and move on to the next area, and I'll try using an additional technique with the nail gun to prevent this from happening again. I had to cut a new board for this section to the right here, but instead of assuming that this corner was a perfect 90, I used this miter gauge to find out the exact angle. The large arrow in the center points out to tell you the exact angle to set your saw if making a single cut, while the small arrow pointing inward tells you what angle to set the saw for 2 miter cuts. So in this case, each of my miter cuts should be more like 45.5 degrees because the corner is actually closer to 91 degrees rather than a perfect 90. I took my measurements down to the basement to start making the cuts. Another good practice is to check periodically to make sure that your miter saw blade is square to the base of your saw. You can do this by setting a speed square on the base and pushing it up against the saw blade to check the angle. I set my saw to 45.5 degrees to make the cut. And then I also used a jigsaw to notch out the far section that would fit around the trim by the railing. Back upstairs, I took the new board and reused the next board, joining the two together with CA glue. Then to try and prevent the boards from coming apart during nailing, I tried some face nailing. It's where you put your face right up against the miter and then you hold it while you... Wait a minute. This doesn't seem right. Oh, that's right, it's called toe nailing. It's where you put your toes right up against the miter and then angle the nail gun. No, I don't think that's it either. Okay, I don't actually remember what it's called, but it's where you nail the two miters together with brad nails. This should prevent the miters from coming apart when nailing them to the wall, and having the CA glue on first allows me to nail them together without risking my fingers. I reused the next baseboard as well, gluing and nailing them onto the first two before sliding them all into place. The corner in the back there turned out to be 88 degrees, and the corner to the left turned out to be 92 degrees. After cutting this long stretch of board though, I was presented with a new problem. Look at where the baseboard meets the floor. There's a gap to the left and then a hump in the middle, and then more gap to the right. This makes the left end hover up off the floor, so the next board around the corner isn't going to match up properly. To fix this, I'm going to use a compass to scribe onto the baseboard. I'll start in the middle of the gap on the left, so that the pencil is on the edge of the board. Then I'll drag the compass to the right along the floor, tracing the contour of the floor onto the baseboard. Since the right side has a gap as well, the pencil line will eventually drop off the bottom edge of the baseboard. Then down in the basement, I kind of freehand cut the board on the table saw. I think a bandsaw would be ideal for this kind of cutting, but since I don't have one, this was my only option. With the board back in place, you can see the gap is now mostly gone. I attached the long board to the previous boards, and then continued around the corner using the same methods as before. I used a magnet to locate the fasteners that are holding the drywall onto the studs, and then I nailed in the baseboards at each of these studs. I then finished things off with another helping of spackle, paint, and caulking. And speaking of caulking, this is a good example of how it can get rid of gaps at the top of a baseboard. If you have any other tips for better baseboard miters, leave a comment below and share it with the rest of us. And don't forget to check out the link in the video description for Starbond's CA glues and use code JOHN'sRenovations for 10% off. And I'll see you in the next video.